Hey, welcome back to American Musical Theater. We're going to be talking about the 1970s today.
Looking at us who got off of the train and the plane and the bus maybe yesterday. It's a city of strangers. Some come to work, some to play. A city of strangers. Some come to stare, some to stay. And every day, some go away. Or they find each other in the crowded streets, in the guarded parks, by the rusty fountains and the dusty trees with the battered barks.
And New York City is a city of strangers. It's a city of strangers. Some come to work, some to come to play. It really wasn't until Stephen Sondheim came along with Company that somebody was able to take all the stuff that had happened before, all that Rodgers and Hammerstein's influence, the director's influence, the choreographer's influence, all that stuff, and morph it into something new that sort of said, okay, that's that. Now we're into a new era. We are now into the 1970s. The end of the 60s, Stephen Sondheim had collaborated on 6 Broadway shows. He followed up his lyric writing for West Side Story with another landmark, Gypsy, and then wrote both music and lyrics for a string of shows, one called A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Forum. In 1970, Sondheim teamed up with Hal Prince on Company and plunged the musical into still a new era. The musical is constantly redefining itself, reinventing itself, new experiments. This show was based upon a group of short plays by George Furth, which dramatized the realities married life would give you living in New York City.
It's the little things you do together that make perfect relationships. The hobbies you pursue together, savings you accrue together, looks you misconstrue together, that make marriage a joy.
I could have blocked that.
No, that can't be blocked.
You want to do it again?
Okay.
I'll come back.
It took a sarcastic look at marriage, relationships, how you meet, how you go along. Company does deal mainly with upper middle class people, with upper middle class problems. Broadway theater has been for many years supported by those theaters. They really wanted to escape their lives when they come to the theater, and here we are throwing it right back in their faces. What they've been trying to avoid, what they came to a musical to avoid, they suddenly find facing them on stage. It's not so hard to be married when two can function as one. It's not so hard to be married. I've done it 3 or 4 times. It was a very sarcastic look at marriage and relationships, not something you would have seen in the 50s at all. In addition to the provocative matter, the subject matter, Sondheim and Prince also challenged the audience by deconstructing the storyline of the musical. We've discussed plot as being 4 major pieces: the exposition, the beginning, the conflict, the climax, the action, and the resolution, and needing those 4 parts of the structure as if it were bones, skeleton. They can be in different orders, but you need all 4 parts for there to be a satisfying plot. Probably the major thing that made Company controversial was that there was no plot. The audience kept waiting for a plot. They played with nonlinear storytelling. It had been preceded at least once with Cabaret, although Cabaret did have linear and nonlinear elements to their storytelling. But now the musical had made its way right into a whole nonlinear evening. The notion of a series of snapshots of a man's life taking place in a metaphysical birthday party, and it keeps changing and flowing back and forth, and you don't know if the guests know each other, and there's a girl in a wedding gown.
Pardon me, is everybody there? Because if everybody's there, I want to thank you all for coming to the wedding. I'd appreciate your going even more. I mean, you must have lots of better things to do, and not a word of it to Paul. Remember, Paul, you know the man I'm going to marry, but I'm not, because I wouldn't ruin anyone as wonderful as he is. But I thank you all for the gifts and the flowers. Thank you all. Now it's back to the showers. Don't tell Paul, but I'm not getting married today. Yes, this day
cast of Company inhabited an abstract urban world and rode a working elevator within Barris Aronson's Jungle Gym set. The show's songs did not emerge from scenes as in traditional musicals. Instead, they provided commentary on the characters and their situations or relationships. All the numbers in Company are inserted like nuts in a fruitcake, and they're inserted into the scenes, or they occupied, in the case of Barcelona, the whole scene. But none of them just arises out of dialogue the way Sondheim had been trained to do by Oscar Hammerstein. Let's listen to a little bit of Barcelona.
Where you going?
Barcelona,
Oh,
don't get up.
do you have to?
Yes, I have to.
Oh,
Don't get up. Now you're angry.
no, I'm not.
Yes, you are.
No, I'm not. Put your things down.
See, you're angry.
No, I'm not.
Yes, you are.
No, I'm not. Put your wings down and stay.
Leaving
Why?
to go to. I
Stay.
have to.
Fly, I know, to Barcelona.
So you can see the scene itself is actually done in the music. It's not separate. The dialogue is not separate. It is actually part of the music. When Company opened in April of 1970, its cynical view of modern relationships and marriage polarized the Broadway audience. Musicals for decades had had no doubts about if you find the right person, you may go the rocky road of love, but it would always lead to so-called happy endings. We were now saying something ambiguous, which is actually there are no endings. It just keeps going on and on and on is really what Company's about. Broadway was always that fun, joyous, think of that Playland that Gershwin wrote in, the Tin Pan Alley music, the fun. Sondheim's world and Sondheim's New York is a place where you lose things, not find them. And you can't even find yourself, where you're alienated, where another 100 people come out of the subway. So it's an ambivalent place. But I think to the extent that those endings are earned, they're a little more mature and they're more interesting to sing about. What they still want is a happy ending. And a happy ending can have a lot of people, even dead people like West Side Story. But it is still a happy ending. Or at least a satisfying ending. By the early 70s, that would be my time of working in New York City, and I loved it. But by 1970s, people would tell me New York City, like the rest of America, was in a deep recession, and nowhere was that more evident than on the Great White Way. This era in the 70s, and this whole area of 42nd Street in the 70s was kind of a sewer. There was this den of pornography, prostitution, felony crime, drug dealing, you name it, was all there. To see Broadway right now, in comparison, it looks like Disneyland. When I walked down 42nd Street in the 70s, most of the theaters had become porno houses with some great memorable titles. Pinocchio, It's Not His Nose That Grows, or Snow White and Her 7 Little Men. Very, very different time, of course. I saw it as gritty. And I took to heart the idea that if I can make it there, I'll make it anywhere. But what Broadway needed was a hit. This time it would come not from a big-time star, but from the supporting cast, from the dancers, the self-titled gypsies who provided the backbone of a musical. Of course, dancers on Broadway are blue-collar workers. It's a life commitment, and it's something that Either you have inside of you and you have to do it, or maybe you should go sell hamburgers. And because it's really not for the weak of heart or those who want an easy life, contrary to popular belief. To me, as a 20-year-old, these reinvigorated Broadway gypsies, to know that we were making the musicals now, that was so inspiring, so invigorating. And I was happy and proud to be called a gypsy and to be in the background. That was terrific. To me, that was success. And in fact, it was a former gypsy who reinvigorated Broadway, making dance so popular that leg warmers became a fashion statement. Michael DeFilippo first appeared in a touring company of West Side Story, but on Broadway, he became known as Michael Bennett. My sister-in-law had met Michael on Hullabaloo, a TV variety show in 1964. One day, they were dancing side by side, and they were bringing the jerk to new heights. And she said, Michael, what are you going to do when you grow up? You can't keep doing this the rest of your life. Did you ever think of that, huh? And he said, oh, yeah, I'm going to be a choreographer. The 70s you had Stephen Schwartz doing Godspell. You had Andrew Lloyd Webber doing Jesus Christ Superstar. But the king for me at that time was Stephen Sondheim. This is a little bit of Follies. First job choreographing on Broadway in 1966. He went on to stage dance numbers in company, and with Hal Prince, he co-directed Stephen Sondheim's next musical, Follies. In 1973, Bennett began to work on his own show without any pre-existing stories. He held a series of workshops where he taped and recorded dancers talking about their experiences. When he started on a chorus line, it was actually called the Dancers Project, and it was a secret. We would start every day with a blank page. They would. And the dancers' lives were part of the process. You know, this was the first time there was such a thing as a workshop. And everyone was young. Everyone was just as desperate to put on something very special, very new. And all they would talk about is, let's do something probably like they've never seen before. With backing from Joseph Papp, Michael Bennett spent an unprecedented 18 months developing this musical out of real stories. Then plot lines did start to emerge about dancers auditioning for a part in a new show. In the beginning, there was a very difficult balance between making this about dancers as people, but not making this about dancers as a metaphor. At that point, can you get away from the dancer metaphor and get into the world of we're all on a line? We're all in this together. It's just one big lifeline. It's just one big chorus line.
Who am I anyway? Am I my resume? That is a picture of a person I don't know. What does he want from me? What should I try to be? So many faces all around, and here we go. I need this job. Oh God, I need this show.
Being on a literal chorus line did not happen until one day in rehearsal. Michael Bennett took a piece of chalk and went down and drew a line on the rehearsal floor. And he said, that's the line we're all on. That line is the common denominator of all these people. It's their lifeline.
God, I hope I get it. I hope I get it. I've come so far, but even so, it could be as it could be. Know how many people does he? I really need start. Please, God, I need a start. I've got to get this show.
Everyone has dreams and hopes, and there was something in that show for everybody. Men who have just retired would write letters and say, those characters made me go out and start a new business. Football players would say, the line, just like a football line. They would talk about the line or being on the line. Most dramatically for the show's finale, Bennett transformed a classic Broadway kick line into a bittersweet comment on the life of a dancer. We all start as individuals, of course. But essentially in the show, we all end up as one.
Singular sensation, every little step she takes. One thrilling combination, every move that she makes. One smile and suddenly nobody else will do. You know you'll never be lonely with you. No.
She walks into a room and you know she's uncommonly rare, very unique, parapathetic, poetic, and chic. She walks into a room and you know from her.
You had an entire unit. The show highlighted individual people and their path to get to this place in their life and all this torture they have to go through to get the job. But to be on Broadway can be just like being on an assembly line. But oh, what an assembly line. I remember my first Broadway contract, and after signing it, going out into the street, and it happened to be March, so the street was filled with St. Patrick's Day revelers, and the feeling of, I belong here. Now, they want me to be here. They're even going to pay me to be here. It was just thrilling. But in A Chorus Line, the genius of Michael Bennett was the one that he gave the audience. He was able to give the audience what they expected, but really what he meant was something else entirely. Line opened at the Public Theater and quickly moved to the Schubert on Broadway in July of 1975. It stayed there for over 15 years, breaking all existing box office records. Michael Bennett and the Chorus Line totally changed the musical theater. It really saved the financial fortunes of the Schubert organizations. It was a catalyst for the improvement of Times Square. And of course, Times Square now is the most desirable area in New York. I remember seeing A Chorus Line at the Schubert Theater in 1975. I was on a high school class trip and we were in the last row of the balcony. I saw the show and went back to my dancing school to my teacher and said, you've got to teach me how to do that turn, jump, step, pivot step, which was the opening combination. 2 years later, I auditioned. I got into a tour of the show. And when I went on the first time and I was doing the opening combination, and I remember thinking to myself, wonder whose real life footsteps I'm dancing in. At the same time that A Chorus Line was moving to Broadway, here we go, a new musical was staged by another dancer turned choreographer, and that's Bob Fossee. In 1973, he became the only person ever to win the triple crown of directing for the Emmy Award. He got the directing with an Emmy Award for Liza with a Z, the Tony for Pippin, and the Oscar for Cabaret. So he got the triple crown. When he accepted the Oscar, he said, being characteristically pessimistic and cynic, this and some of the other nice things that has happened to me the last couple of days may turn me into some sort of hopeful optimist, and that will just ruin my life. Fossee was a show business veteran. He began dancing as a child in an act called the Riff Brothers and worked his way up to dance both on Broadway and in Hollywood. He was on track to be the next Fred Astaire.
Smell it, put it in my lapel, and I stop the audience. Want my clothes were shabby, tailors called me cabby, so I took a vow, said this bumm'll be Beau Brummel. Now I'm smooth and snappy, now my tailor's happy. I'm the cat's meow, my wardrobe is a wow. Paris silk, Paris tweed, there's only one thing I need. Got my tweed pressed, got my best vest. All I need now is the girl. Got my striped tie, got my hopes, I got the time and the place, and I got rhythm. Now all I need's the girl to go with.
When Fossee first started working in Hollywood, he had no idea he'd become the famous choreographer we know today. He was just a song and dance man. And as you watch him in Kiss Me Kate or in the chorus of dozens of other films, it was obvious even then that he was going to be as good a song and dance man as Gene Kelly, Fred Astaire, or any of the real greats. Fossee possessed a distinctive style, and it was evident from the first musical he choreographed, The Pajama Game. In The Pajama Game, he directed and choreographed, playing both roles off stage. Then while working on his next production, Damn Yankees, he met the girl. All he needed now was the girl. Well, that girl was Gwen Verdon. And the two of them ended up creating 5 shows. Fossee really created the shows around her. Gwen Verdon became the quintessential Fossee dancer, and in time, his wife as well. You've already seen her, especially if you did the warm-up for the midterm. Then you'll recognize this right away.
Who's got the pain when they do the mambo? Who's got the pain when they go up? Who's got the pain when they do the mambo? I don't know who. Do you? Who needs a pill when they do the mambo? Who needs a pill when they go up? Who needs a pill?
If you practice that dance, you're probably almost sick of this song. but
Someone must be singing when he or stepping on it.
Fossee loved to make women look beautiful. I think Gwen was the sexiest of them all because she had this angelic innocence about her. Over the next 2 decades, Fossee refined his signature style. He explained the development as his style in this way. He said, I suppose if you repeat something enough times, it's called a style. You know, I started with hats because I began losing my hair. And it was very early, and I've also always been slightly round shoulder. So I started to exaggerate that, and I don't have what the ballet dancers call a turnout, so I started turning my feet in, and I guess that's what the style is all about. What is a directorial or choreographic style, you may ask? Well, when you see Agnes DeMille or Jerome Robbins, Fossee or Bennett's work, you know immediately that it's their style, in the same way as if you saw Picasso. And you can easily say, without knowing very much about art, oh, is that like Picasso? You can do the same with their choreographic movement and what a show looks like when they direct it. In 1975, Fossee created a musical out of a Prohibition-era story of corruption and murder. He turned to the composing team of Kander and Ebb, and together they beefed up its show business elements. Fossee's most enduring work for Broadway would be called Chicago.
Five, six, seven, eight.
adapt a very straight play if he had any ideas on how to musicalize it. And so he came up with going back to vaudeville, that vaudeville concept. That while Chicago was set in the past, the show sharply satirized in America that it was now obsessed with murder, sex, and celebrity. The lawyer Billy Flynn will do anything for a buck, but claims otherwise. He's a phony. He's a liar. He actually peddles alternative facts before we knew what they were. He comes out and sings a phony song about a phony emotion. He doesn't mean it for a minute, and you can tell. This is Jerry Orbach. You probably know him as one of the detectives from Law and Order.
I don't care about expensive things, cashmere coats, diamond rings don't mean a thing. All I care about is love. That's what I'm here for. I don't care for wearing silk cravats, ruby studs, satin spats don't mean a thing. All I care about is love. Give me two eyes of blue, softly saying I need you. Let me see her standing there, and honest mister, I'm a millionaire. I don't care for any fine attire, Vanderbilt might admire. No, no, not me. All I care about is love.
All he cares about is love. It's actually an indictment of our pop culture. Chicago had a style of black humor. It's almost like cabaret. There's a lot of harking back to vaudeville and to burlesque, but always with that cynicism. When Chicago opened in '75, it got very mixed reviews. Now the show is looked on as some sort of icon, and the fact is it's the same music, the same text, the same lyrics, the same orchestrations as it was back then. But we're much more used to it now.
Come on, babe, why don't we paint the town? And all that jazz, I'm gonna rouge my knees and roll my stockings.
People went in expecting to see a vaudeville and, a happy ending, but it was very dark. I don't think the public was really ready for it, and of course it opened 5 days after a chorus line, which made it very tough on the reviews. It was a little ahead of its time. Fossee, though, we see his legacy living today. We see it in the film Chicago. We see the movie All That Jazz. We see TV specials about Fossee and Gwen Verdon. Fossee, we see it everywhere. You see it in fashion. You see it on television. You see the commercials. Every time you see somebody wear a hat, you can see his style popping up. And that's the mark of a true artist. So again, check on my courses, and we'll be continuing to move on. We're getting closer and closer to the end, so hang in there and stay strong.
Like your hair.